Hello and welcome to the VideoVortex. This week I'm dressed a bit like a cinema usher because I'm going to take you through some classic B-movies, some black and white classics from the kind of 1940s to the 1960s. Now these might not be the greatest what we call B-movies in the world. These tended to be shorter films that were shown before the main feature, or as they were nicknamed as the big picture in the UK. But these are perfect for watching with your friends on a Friday night or cuddling up with somebody special. So I thought we'd have a nice fun little episode. First up is House on Haunted Hill from 1959. Now you might be more familiar with a remake from 1999 starring Geoffrey Rush in the character of Mr. Price. Now that name comes from the star of the original, Vincent Price, and I think this is one of his most fun performances. Vincent Price was a very, very versatile actor. He was very much kind of stereotyped or typecast into horror roles, but he showed great diversity throughout his career. He starred in a few movies with Bette Davis quite early on, and a lot of like historical dramas and things, and this is one of his movies that really cemented his reputation. Also cemented the reputation of the director William Castle as well. He made quite a few movies with Vincent Price. He was kind of like another Roger Corman of his time. They were famous B-movie moguls who made a lot of money out of making cheap horror movies. Cheap in terms of price, not necessarily in terms of content, although some of Corman's films do look a bit cheap. Attack of the Crab Monsters is a noticeable one. What's interesting about Castle is he actually got a bit more critical acclaim towards the end of his career, and he was part of the production team for Rosemary's Baby, which was Roman Polanski's 1967 kind of cult movie starring Mia Farrow with the famous Vidal Sassoon haircut. And you get a great performance in that from Ruth Gordon as well, famous for being in Harold and Maude. She got a Best Supporting Actress nomination for that movie. But I digress. Let's get back on topic of House on Haunted Hill. You get a really good performance by Elijah Cook Jr., who starred in over hundreds and hundreds of different movies. He was usually contracted to a company called AIP in America towards his later end career and worked on various movies, and Blackula is a noticeable example. He turns up as cameos in a lot of movies, but he actually started quite early on in the kind of late 30s, early 40s, and appears in some like Humphrey Bogart movies directed by John Huston. He's in one of the famous film noirs. I can never remember if it's The Big Sleep or Maltese Falcon. He plays a character who's considered a gumshoe, but he was a very noticeable actor, very recognisable, and he appeared in a lot of these movies to kind of earn some money. You also get some quite recognisable eyes. However, it's due to the fact it is the sister of a very famous actor. You'll recognise the surname, I'm sure. Her name was Julie Mitchum. Yes, it's the sister of Robert Mitchum, who didn't make that many films, probably made about half a dozen in the end. She's not too bad in this movie. She's got the same kind of droopy face, I don't mean that in a nasty way, as Mitchum. As well, you get some interesting other central performances as well. You get a very kind of classical 1950s man. So those of you that are interested in 1950s America, that read up on like Talcott Parsons and stuff, will love this character. He's called Lance, and he's an airline pilot, and he stands up straight, and he's perceived as being hyper masculine. The lead female, her character is called Nora Manning, and she suffers from that kind of illness that most women do in 1950s American films, in that she sort of screams a lot and has triangular boobs. But her performance is a bit wooden, it's safe to say. She wasn't the most promising actress in the world, and she actually ended up committing suicide through a self-inflicted gunshot wound towards the end of the 60s. Which is not ideal. But let's go on to something more cheerful if we move on to the next film. Carol Omar appeared in this movie. She was an actress with some kind of genuine charisma, and she also appeared in the next movie we're going to talk about. Next up is Spider Baby from 1967, directed by Jack Hill, quite an underrated director who'd later go on to work with Pam Grier in some early blaxploitation movies, and also did a kind of rally racing kind of movie not long after this one. To be honest, I'd never actually heard of this movie till a couple of years ago when Arrow in the UK released a really, really good Blu-ray. This film's noticeable for starring Lon Chaney Jr., the son of, well, Lon Chaney Sr. Perhaps most famous for playing the Wolfman in Universal Studios' his classic movie, The Wolfman. Forgive me if this is getting a bit monotonous, but Lon Chaney Jr. really kind of brings the cast together. He brings a certain gravitas to this movie in the kind of way that like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing used to bring to some of the Hammer horror movies. He gets to sing the theme tune to this film, and he can't sing very well, and neither can I, but I just really like it. The song's like, and goblins and ghouls and werewolves and stuff like that. It's really kind of kitschy and kind of cool. It's one of the original title of the movie. Originally it had like a title, something like Orgy from Hell or Orgy of Death or Orgy Monsters or something. A lot of orgies must have been going on in the late 60s in America. I doubt that would have gone down too well with Lyndon B. Johnson. You get a great performance from Sid Haig as well. Sid Haig, perhaps most noticeable for being in the movies of Rob Zombie, House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, etc. Fans of Amicus movies might recognise a slight cameo that he has in Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, where he plays a kind of voodoo priest. And he's really good in this movie. He plays somebody with learning difficulties. And it reminded me a bit of the Todd Browning film Freaks from the kind of 1930s, 1940s. Some elements of his characterizations were really, really interesting. This movie has a really, really sinister end. It takes a while to get going, this movie, but the end really, really freaked me out. And there's a really kind of, it's more of a cameo really early on from an actor called Manton Moreland. He was quite a big star in the 1930s and 40s. I think he starred in some Charlie Chan movies and different things. He's perhaps a bit underused in this, but this was quite later in his career and he wasn't in the best of health at the time. But he does feature in one of his finest hours in the next movie we're going to look at. Next up is King of the Zombies from 1941, the earliest film in our list, starring Dick Purcell. Could you get a more American name than that? Yes, there must have been a lot of Lancers and Dicks in America in the 1940s and 60s. Steady on. This movie is just completely stolen by Manton Moreland, who was an excellent actor. However, it's very much kind of based on racial stereotypes of the 1930s and 40s. People often write this off to more kind of innocent times, and it can be quite offensive in terms of the way that black characters or characters from ethnic minorities in a country are reduced to playing like second fiddle or comedic characters. In a way, as that, like the punchline of a lot of jokes. You see that with representations of like gay characters in 60s and 70s cinema quite a lot. But I think some of the dialogue that he gets in this movie is quite witty, which I really like about it. He's quite an empowered man. He's a man of the world. And he refers to a zombie as a fugitive from the Undertakers at one point, and I really like that as a line. This movie stars Henry Victor, who had appeared in Todd Browning's Freaks as well, a sort of mad scientist type role. And a useful bit of trivia, this is perfect for pub quizzes if you go to pubs where they have questions about 1940s zombie films. This was pretty much the only zombie film to ever be nominated for an Oscar in terms of its score. So the music was actually nominated for an Oscar. This movie actually did really good business, and horror movies were really big in the 30s and 40s thanks to companies like Universal and RKO putting out movies like Frankenstein, Dracula, etc. So these was like Hollywood Skid Row were having one last hurrah for the next generation of filmmakers come in. And there's some cracking dialogue in this movie. That's King of the Zombies from 1941. Next up is a movie that was shot over 5 days, which is A Bucket of Blood from 1959. Now I actually picked it up as part of this little box set, which is really excellent. It's called the 60s collection. I think it's out in most regions, but you get a lot of kind of B movies in here. I could have included most of these movies if we're talking about classic films, but we're talking about pure fun Friday night movies. But Carnival of Souls, it's like the prototype B movie from the early 1960s, was a big influence on George Romero and independent filmmakers of the late 1960s who go on to make Night of the Living Dead, and which is also in the box set, pretty much because there was issues with the copyright when it was released, so it was kind of rushed out and they forgot to put like the C on there, whatever it was in them days. So that's why they ended up pretty much doing a remake of it eventually, was to try and make some money off the legacy of the movie. Last Man on Earth's in here as well, which is a good Vincent Price movie, which was actually shot in Spain. It's basically a reworking of I Am Legend, the famous Richard Matheson story. It's 10 times better than that terrible CGI garbage starring Will Smith. I'm not known to sit on the fence. Will Smith, you should be ashamed of yourself. Put your ideas up, sunshine. Dementia 13, which was one of Francis Ford Coppola's first movies, which is an interesting little potboiler. First saw that on the Horror Channel in the UK. There is reports that he worked on another film, which is called The Terror, which Jack Nicholson kind of co-directed as well. but I think he's denied that on certain occasions. You get City of the Dead in here as well, which is a decent little movie. Produced by Milton Subotsky. Then this is before he actually went on to form Amicus Pictures, and it stars Christopher Lee trying his best to do an American accent. I love Christopher Lee. He doesn't pull it off. There's more chance of me passing off as a Shakira body double. But we come to the film at the end, which is there, A Bucket of Blood from 1959. Directed by famed B-movie maker Roger Corman. This is one of his better earlier efforts, and it stars Dick Miller as Walter Paisley. And I absolutely love this movie because I live not far from a place called the Northern Quarter in Manchester, and it's considered like a really bohemian area. And this movie is a bit of a satire, not just a kind of low-budget horror, on the kind of beatnik bohemian scene of the late 50s and early 1960s. I forgot the name of the poet now. The guy with a beard. James Franco played him in a movie. Allen Ginsberg, who's good friends with Bob Dylan. The character very much like him, called Maxwell H. Brock. And some of his poetry in the movie, it's very much a parody of that kind of style. Check out Ginsberg's poem America. It's one of the best poems in my opinion ever written, and it's 66 minutes. It's lean, it's efficient, and Empire magazine a couple of years ago actually gave it 5 stars on its re-release. And Dick Miller's character Walter Paisley wants to be part of the scene. He wants to be taken as a serious artist, and he's working in this bohemian cafe where there's kind of like funky jazz music. There's a decent little jazz score going on, and what happens is he's trying to create some art, and he accidentally kills a cat that's trapped in the wall. For some reason, this cat all of a sudden has rigor mortis about 30 seconds later, pretty much because it's a standard prop from another movie. But he ends up covering it in like clay, and somebody comes in and actually thinks that it's a work of art, you know. What happens is he has to keep like building up his collection, so he ends up killing people. He kills the first one by accident in a kind of area which looks a bit like kind of like a lumberjack's yard or something, or a factory, and then he ends up killing people and covering them in clay and wax and different things. And it's a really fun movie. I could have put another one in which is a bit more well known, called Little Shop of Horrors, which many people might know from the remake from, I think it was the 80s. So it's Steve Martin with the kind of Broadway musical numbers in it. That's a classic as well, and it was made around the same time, starring Dick Miller and directed by Roger Corman. But I think this one is a much better film, and it's got much more of a fun vibe to it. You often see them both on the Horror Channel in the UK. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the Video Vortex. It is a joy as always to talk about these kind of movies. The zombie episode, I promised, is coming up soon. I've just been full of a cold. You can probably tell on my voice a little bit, and that will be one of the next episodes. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.